Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CERTCon 2021, where being a CERT is not the shirt, it's who you are at all times. It shows your instinct to help others without expecting anything in return, in the way you process your surroundings that allow you to quickly adapt to changing situations. It's in your desire to continually refine your skills and knowledge, as well as your need to grow beyond your comfort zone. Being a CERT's who you are, it's not a role that you play. That's what makes you worth celebrating, you, the everyday CERT. Again, welcome to CERTCon 2021. Today is day 6 of our amazing conference. We're truly excited to have you here with us today. And Anita, we've got some amazing things going on today. Would you like to tell us what they are?
I'd be happy to. I hope everybody else is as excited as we are. Here at Ops Center, we are literally bouncing off the ceiling with excitement. We are thrilled beyond expectation. And yes, that is a pun. That was one of the prior themes in one of the CERTCons over the last 10 years. Missy, can I break the news about the breaking record?
Oh, please do.
Folks, we have 301 registrants. Woohoo! We did it. So with that, we have people signed up for all kinds of different sessions, and I'm so glad you're joining us for this one. We have a special guest in our opening remarks. After that, we'll go into a featured session with Nick Arnett. You don't want to miss that one. We'll have a little bit of a break, and so that goes to 1:30. 1:45, we're starting with Chief Basso. Dana and I met him a few years ago at an EMI training, and you're not going to miss that session as well. He's our second featured speaker of the day. And then at 3 o'clock, we have how many? 4 different options. So the afternoon is jam-packed with content. The good news is the sessions are being recorded. So you can choose the one in the 3 o'clock block that is your not to miss today, and the others you can watch later on. Recordings are available about 2 hours after the session ends and will be online for 30 days. So with that said, our special guest for this block of time is Mr. Suva Tai. He is the president of the National CERT Association. Welcome, Suva.
Good morning, Anita. Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about the National CERT Association, how long you've existed?
Sure. So the National Association is a nonprofit. It was created to pull together the CERT program managers, state coordinators, instructors, volunteers, basically all of the energy in CERT to share resources and share communications and make CERT better. It was conceived actually because there were a couple of us helping out with the 2018 National CERT Conference in Florida. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but there aren't a lot of national CERT conferences. And that's because of the amount of resources that it takes to put on a conference, and also the amount of subject matter expertise that you're going to need to put on something at a national level. When we were helping the Florida put on their conference, we got word that several other states wanted to host a conference. And while FEMA headquarters were able to say, yeah, you can have the conference in 2020, they were still at a loss on how to go about doing it, right? It's very exciting to say we want a conference. Like the CERTCon, I've never done a virtual workshop before, so I would need to ask Missy and Anita on guidance on what's the best way to do it. 300 registrants, that's amazing, right? How do you do breakout rooms on Zoom? I've never done a breakout room on Zoom. So we thought, well, in 2020, Missouri wanted the National CERT Conference, and this was pre-COVID. And we're like, great, they can have it. Me and Jamie was the chair of the Florida conference, would sit on their planning team and the system. And then we got word that Mississippi and Ohio wanted to host a conference. And we said, well, why don't we create a work group so that the previous conference planners will sit on the next conference, and then invite the next conference to sit on the previous conference and learn. And then we say, well, why stop there, right? Why stop at conferences? There's so many other things that CERT can benefit from. So we asked FEMA if they were okay with us creating a national association or some kind of group that will assist CERT programs doing other things. Think about your CERT program when you have volunteers get together and say, hey, our program's only able to do this. but they're willing to let us do this if we're willing to help out, right? How many programs benefit from their volunteers spending all their energy to plan training, plan events, and keep people engaged? And that's what the NCA does. The NCA partners with FEMA. We have an MOU. And before we start any project, we say, hey, FEMA, is this going to be in line with what you guys want for CERT? And they say, yep, that's in line with it. And we also check, are you going to do this? Because if FEMA wants to do something, they should be the ones to do it. Just like your sponsoring agency, if they were going to do something, they should do it, not the volunteers. However, if they say, nope, we would love for the volunteer to do this, or no, we don't have the bandwidth, but we are in favor of this, can you do this? That's the same way the NCA operates. The NCA is led by state coordinators and program managers and instructors, and soon we're going to have volunteers in our board of directors, right? So it's led by people who have been vetted, who have a lot of energy and want to pro bono their time to benefit the CERT program. A couple of projects that the NCA currently is involved with is trainer, program manager, supplemental training. So we just concluded our weekly webinar series where we did every single module. We're going to be assisting states and territories with some guidance on how to vet trainer, and program manager instructors. We're doing the national conferences, which FEMA doesn't have the bandwidth to touch. We're going to start taking over the national awards. So if you're aware, FEMA used to do ICPD awards, right? Individual Community Preparedness Division. That stopped 2 years ago because of funding and bandwidth. So the NCA will start taking that over. FEMA is rolling out their credentialing effort in the summertime. And in our MOU, it states that the NCA will assist FEMA with kind of integrating that at the local level and providing technical assistance for CERT programs to be able to learn how to credential their volunteers, either per FEMA standards or per your own local state standards. So it's very exciting. One of the best thing is that it allows for communication between other state coordinators. You know, before the NCA, I never was able to communicate with all the state coordinators. I don't have their email contacts. We never had a webinar or a phone to pull all the coordinators together, but now we do. Just like at the local program level, you have your CERT leads that come together on a regular basis. Now we're able to do that at the state level. So it's very exciting.
Suva, one of the questions that we had yesterday during our opening session was from somewhere in the United States. Someone had asked how they can obtain resources or start a CERT program with limited funding in their jurisdiction. Do you have any ideas or suggestions that might be able to help someone in a jurisdiction that doesn't yet have a program, but they're inspired to do so?
Yeah, you know, I actually answer this question quite regularly in the state of California. We always see a lot of sponsoring agencies or individuals that will contact us at the state level and say, hey, I'm interested in a CERT program. Where do I get started? And the first thing I will say is, well, you need a sponsoring agency. Who is going to be the organization that's going to be behind the program, that's going to maintain it and support it, either with funding or instructors or networking within the local area? And usually they'll say, oh, yeah, I know the fire department or I'm an elected official. But if they don't, then I usually will give them kind of advice on where to go to find a sponsor agency or talk to the city council so you can get interest and get somebody behind starting a program. Then I talk about what's required to put on a class, right? The bare minimum is going to be the equipment and supplies for a classroom-based setting, pre-COVID, of course. A laptop, projector, then you need instructors, people who are willing to get in front of the room and have the experience and skills necessary to teach the skills and the training and the content behind CERT. Then I say, then you're going to need to promote the training. So have somebody who can be the program manager and handle registration and understand that. And then I give them a little bit of cost. Say, look, if you're starting from zero and you need to buy a laptop, a projector, a screen, a fire pan, extinguishers, it might cost you $3,000 at the very low end, and maybe $5,000 at the medium end, and $10,000 at the higher end. But I always say, if you're a fire department, you have everything you need to put on a CERT training. So, and that's really important because you know, half the CERT programs belong to fire departments, and for them to know that, hey, we already have firefighters who can teach the content. We already have the mannequins and the fire extinguisher, the fire pan, and the classroom-based setting. All we need now is the content. And I drive them to the FEMA website. I let them know that you can get manuals for free. So that saves a lot of money. We don't have to print, you know, manuals every single time we do training. And then I will connect them with local programs near them. So I will connect them with either their county contact for the CERT program or another fire department or police department or a similar program if they're rural or urban, so that they have somebody that can mentor them and walk them through the process, but also so that they can visit their CERT program and check out their training. But also we find that with CERT programs, they're more than happy if it's convenient for them to help other people train, right? It's amazing how CERT leaders are willing to volunteer their time and do everything they can just as if it was their own program. So that's usually my steps for inviting someone to start a program.
So we have one more question here. For somebody that's taken the CERT training and has probably disengaged from being active because of COVID, how might you suggest that they re-engage or sharpen and advance their skills during these COVID times?
You know, that's a very timely question because we're starting to see a lot of programs come out of the COVID restrictions. A lot of states are starting to lift a lot of that. A lot of programs are planning to have their first in-person activity, whether it's training or a social activity recognition or just, hey, we just want to see your face of activity, but don't really know about how to go about doing it, right? You can't just put energy behind something, just like you can't just put money behind something. There's always going to be a best practice for how to do it. One of the things that the NCAA actually does is we host a quarterly webinar with FEMA Region 2. The last webinar we did was for CERT supporting COVID-19 vaccines. We actually did a CERT past, present, future webinar that we didn't count toward that series, but I think the next topic might be how to return to CERT after COVID, right? There's two sides to it. There is the program manager side, and how do you re-engage your members who have not seen you for a year and a half? We know how dedicated we can be when you're doing something every single day, but for some reason, once you stop doing something, it's easy to just never do it again, right? I'm guilty of it for the gym. I can go to the gym for 90 days straight. The minute I give myself an excuse not to go to the gym, guess what? It's been a year, 2 years, 3 years that I have not gone back to the gym. So I have to get back into it. And when you're talking about volunteers who are given their time, they might have found new hobbies, new social groups, and new things that they put their energy in. So how do you remind them about why this is important? Remind them about what they liked about the CERT program in the first place. And then the second piece is obviously for the program. How do they go back to life post-COVID, and do they enact any of the safety precautions that you had to do during COVID, right? A lot of people are tired of wearing masks, and you're saying, hey, come back to the living, but bring your mask also. Then they'll say, well, what's the point, right? I was already wearing a mask. I didn't want that. I wanted to go back to regular. So that's a juggling act you have to do. I'm going to say this. For volunteers, from what I've seen interacting with volunteers, they like two aspects of the CERT programs the most. It's not the safety, right? Once you've taken the training, you know how to be safe and prepare for disaster. So you don't stay with your CERT program to get better, right? You can stay with a CERT program for 5 years. You don't get that much better in earthquake safety. The reason why you stay is because, one, it offers you the opportunity to be a leader in your community, right? A lot of people don't have that in their professional lives, the opportunity to supervise or be leaders or guide people to be better. Being a CERT leader, a volunteer that does the CERT leadership role, gives you that opportunity. And the second is going to be the social aspect, right? They found a group of friends who are like-minded, who want to talk about the same things, and they're able to do and work on the same projects and feel success. Just like this panel here who's doing this workshop, the CERTCon, right? You guys have a lot of smiles getting 300 registrations because you worked hard, and there's a lot of success in this. And that's why you want to do this and do this again. Planning conferences are the same way. So you really have to hit those two things if you find that your volunteers are the same way, and offer them and remind them of why they want to see each other. Maybe show faces of the CERT leaders in your flyers. Say, hey, come back together, so they can remember, oh, it's this person I'm there for, right? And then remind them about the next training coming up that they have to be part of to help advertise to keep their community safe. And maybe that's going to get people there. But I think when we finally have this webinar on how to come back to CERT after COVID, we're going to hear from a lot of different programs and some of what they've already done, because some programs have already done it, and maybe learn what has been successful and what hasn't, so that when you do it, you don't have to guess.
Okay, we've also got a question on chat. A question yesterday from a nonprofit emergency management operator is, are there national resources and connections, training centralized to help them consider starting a CERT in their location?
Yes, so to start a CERT program at a remote location, besides the equipment and instructors, what you're going to want is to be able to take the trainer class and a program manager class. Now, it's funny because the trainer class and program manager class has only been standardized for about 12 years now, right? In 2011, well, less than 12 years now, 10 years now. 2011 is when FEMA rolled out their national curriculum for these two classes. Before that, in order to take what FEMA considers program manager and trainer training, you had to go to EMI or have an L delivery. Many states actually created their own training based on what they thought was going to be, oh, to run a CERT program, you need to understand this. And we create our own training. And to deliver CERT, we want you to have this kind of training. So prior to that, a lot of people ran CERT programs for decades and gave training without these classes. However, the great thing about these classes is that it'll get you to 80%, 90% of where you should be before you start running a CERT program or delivering it. So you're just not guessing, right? I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that have run programs for decades. They never considered liability because no one ever told them, hey, you're going to be liable if somebody gets injured during training. They always thought, oh, I thought there was magical insurance that people that would come and take care of somebody. I thought I could call a number at national headquarters and they would take care of somebody who got injured, and that's not true. So taking these classes is really going to help you, especially if you have very little resources and you're afraid of getting started. By taking these, the program manager class, you're going to understand everything you need to put on and create a successful CERT program. And by taking the instructor class, the trainer is going to really get your instructors to the place where they know how to teach CERT. Because a lot of people assume, oh, CERT is cribbing, CERT is fire extinguisher. I know how to teach that, but a firefighter would teach that a lot higher, at a higher level than you should be teaching it for CERT. It's like saying, hey, teach math. Well, math can be taught at the college level, at the grade school level, at the kindergarten level. So really understanding the box that CERT is what the trainer class is for. Now, prior to COVID, you had to take a classroom-based training. And there are two ways of doing that. Either take one locally, which if you're in an area that doesn't have any CERT programs, you're not going to have an option of taking it locally, or go to EMI and take it at Emmitsburg, the FEMA Training Center, which only allowed for so many participants per year, even though it was a free class to take, and most of the time they would cover your travel costs. But now due to COVID, FEMA is actually going to be piloting their virtual deliveries of both these courses in the summertime. Once it's been piloted, they're going to start adding that to the rotation so that you can have opportunity to take it remotely and not have to travel, which is a big burden, especially during COVID. But after COVID, it's going to make it a lot more flexible for people who just cannot get away for 3 or 4 days in a row to take the training and be able to take it virtually and take it 4 hours at a time for several days. So I would say take that. I already mentioned that the NCAA created a webinar series, which has all the program manager courses and all the trainer courses broken up into modules, okay? If you are not part of the NCAA, you can still get access to this training. So we make the training available to state coordinators if they email and say, hey, and I actually have to email the state coordinators the links to all of the training, and it's up to the state coordinator to share it, right? Program manager and trainer classes are gated by your program manager and gated by your state coordinator. So we make it available to state coordinators make it available to program managers can make it available to anybody in the program that they want free, right? None of this will cost money. The purpose of the NCAA is really to allow you to join the communication network directly. So instead of having to go through the channels that I just mentioned, by joining the NCAA, we can vet you to be a program manager and give you access directly to these resources. So they're available and you can take that training. And I think that once FEMA releases their pilot deliveries, a lot of states are going to start doing their training virtually as well. California has done a couple of those deliveries. We look forward to looking at FEMA's deliveries to learn from them and then modifying our deliveries so we can offer that either in whole or in part more often.
Can you post or can we somehow share links for more information on what you're talking about?
So yeah, so let me share with you a little bit of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share my screen. So as I mentioned, one of the things about the NCA is resource sharing. There's resources everywhere, right? The programs putting on this workshop have a lot of resources on how to put on a workshop or how to deliver certain training. A lot of presenters here have a lot of resources. But the problem with resources is that the person who created owns it, and the people that they interacted with owns it, right? So I have thousands of CERT resources on my hard drive, but I only share what's relevant. And once I share it, I don't think, oh, I need to share it again every couple of months so that new program managers can get it. But if Anita emails me, hey, Suvati, do you have this? I say, sure, I have it. Here you go. But then she has to email me every single time she wants a resource. What if she just wants to search for a resource? What if she wants to search for resources that are beyond what I have? So with the NCA, we are creating a master resource library where we are collecting resources and vetting them so that they can be shared. And here's what it looks like. We did it on Google Sheets. So it's a list of resources, and right now we have about 500 resources, and it includes webinar trainings, it includes files that used to be on FEMA's website, but it's not there anymore, like the CERT liability annex, like the advanced modules that you can't find on the website anymore. And then you can find a resource and then the link for it, so you can just click and download the link, right? The key is getting access to this source sheet. I can't just make it public domain because it's going to have some documents and some stuff that's gated based on where you are in your CERT program. Some things are for state coordinator eyes only, things that are in pilots, things that are like, hey, they're not approved for nationwide use, but as a state coordinator, you can check it out. If you like it, share with your program. There are things that are just for program managers that a general volunteer shouldn't have access to, things that are for instructors. So there's this thing called permission level. So when we add a resource, we can designate what the permission level is. And the permission is linear. NCA leadership, state, territory, FEMA coordinators, CERT program managers, CERT instructors, and volunteers. So if you're a program manager, you have access to that level, instructors, and volunteer resources. Volunteers is basically resources that are available to the general public. We have created these subsheets that will automatically pull. So the program manager subsheet will automatically pull all of the resources that are designated for program manager and below. So when we update our resource sheet, we will not have to remember to update all the sheets at once. And if we decide say, hey, why was this classified as a state level? This really should be program manager level. We can just click program manager and toggle it. And then all of a sudden now it's available for program managers. Anyone who has access to the program manager spreadsheet will now have access to that resource. Right? Whenever someone asks me for a resource and I say, yep, here it is, I will add it here. So I say, so we will slowly be adding to this, and this is going to continue to grow. We're slowly going to be vetting resources from around the US, and it's going to grow. And there are resources that I get from FEMA because I asked them that FEMA wasn't ready to release yet, but they're like, there's no reason why we can't release it yet. Case in point, I have the trainer, and program manager materials, the 2021 version in Spanish and Mandarin. Can't find that on FEMA's website yet, right? But they have it. They've had it since last September. But I asked them, and they said, oh yeah, here it is. And it's on the spreadsheet. So that means that program managers and state coordinators who want to do that training in that language can now download the PowerPoint, instructor manual, and participant guide, and now have the official FEMA materials to deliver those classes. So when you join the NCA, we vet you for your permission level. And once again, permission level is gated by the person above you. So if your state says, hey, all of our program managers should have access to all of this stuff, then we'll give your program manager state level permissions. If a program manager says, these are my 5 volunteers, give them program manager level permissions or give them instructor level permissions, we'll designate them a program manager. We don't care, right? To us, it's like whoever can benefit your CERT program, we'll share with them. And we'll share for free. By joining the NCA, and there is a small membership fee, it's $25 a year. You get a nice challenge point. It helps to pay for the website and some of the backbone of the NCA, 501c3 status and whatnot. But it allows you now to be vetted to have direct contact. And once you have access, you can share with your network. So it just takes your program manager, it takes your state coordinator, and we are offering free, what we call program manager level permissions to all state coordinators and all registered program managers. So if you registered your program or updated your CERT registration on FEMA's website in 2021, you can apply for a free program manager level membership, which will give you access to the emails and resource library. It doesn't give you the challenge point because it costs money to make it and ship it out. But that means that no CERT program will be withheld from the resource sharing or communications because of the membership fee. So we thought that was very important. So that's what we have. And for state coordinators who are new, for program managers who are new, this is going to be invaluable because now you can spend, you know, we have our own hobbies where we're up at 2 a.m. watching YouTube videos on something we're very interested in. I see a lot of program managers who can access this at 2 a.m. and say, hey, what is out there? Just start scrolling down and then going by category and going by permission level, just see what's out there, opening it up, and then now learning something that it can now implement into their program.
Thank you for sharing that. Those are some really amazing resources. So Suva, we're curious, could you let us know the next national conference, where and when?
So the next national conference is going to be in Missouri, and actually I'll pull up the website right now. Oops. 2021 nationalcertconference.com. If you go to 2020, it will actually reroute it to 2021. It's going to be in Springfield, Missouri. So the planning team is going to be a lot of subject matter experts in Springfield. In the state of Missouri. I'm on the planning team, and a couple of people from the Florida planning team are on it as well. They're currently at about 320 registrants, which is amazing because we're almost 2 months out. At any time I've done a conference, we usually have 80% of our attendees register in the last 2 weeks. People just wait to the very end before they finally register. This will probably cap out at around 400 because of COVID, and they're following COVID restrictions and everything. So if you're interested in going, I would recommend that you register soon. It's fairly affordable. It's about $20 for registration. And in California, for our conferences, the registration is about $350. For our state emergency managers conference, it's $850 for a 2.5-day conference. So they're making it very, very affordable. And the reason they're able to do that is because they're not paying anyone to present. And actually, almost all presenters, if not all, are paying their own way to go there. Planning team members are paying their own registration. So they're really just making it as cheap as possible and not subsidizing anything they don't have to make sure that as a participant, you don't have to pay more than you have to. The hotel is filling up very quickly. I think it's about $115 a night, which is also very, very good. It's the Oasis Hotel. And then the full agenda is actually on the website now too. So if you go down to the website, you can see the agenda. You have the presenters, and there's a link somewhere for the agenda. There's also a challenge point. There was a date of April 30th where you get the coin for free, and after April 30th, it'll cost you $10. Although, you know, if the conference can swing it, they'll probably end up giving it to everybody for free anyway, the participants. Rather than charging people for it, I think they might charge $5 if they have to. It really depends on, once again, how much money they're able to raise and offset for the cost of the conference. But it's the first time anyone's done anything in a year and a half. Looking forward to seeing people and really networking and seeing where CERT is 2 years later after COVID. I'll put the link in the chat box.
Excellent. So folks, I've seen the question pop up multiple times. The link for the National CERT Association is in the chat. We have several instances of it, and also the link for the conference is coming up any second now. So take a look at that and save that for your reference later on.
Yeah, and you know, our website, the unfortunate thing is the NCA is led by people like me. And unfortunately, I've been deployed many times over the last 2 years. So the website may be a little out of date. We do have our leadership team. So if you go and click on our team and leadership, you actually will see who are the leaders of the NCA, who are we trusting to run things the right way. And it's really a lot of CERT program managers, instructors. But we also, like I said, we have a strong partnership with FEMA. And so on our leadership meetings, we have the FEMA observers on. So at each FEMA region, there is an RPL, Regional Preparedness Liaison, and a CPO, Community Preparedness Officer. They sit on our leadership team. They can't vote. So FEMA wanted to make sure that they can't vote and influence what the NCA is doing, but they are definitely advisors, and we check in with them. But we also want to know what they're doing so that we don't duplicate those efforts or erase those efforts or contradict those efforts. And then obviously Andy Burrows, who's the National Program Manager for CERT. I work with them all the time on all the projects that we do, and we don't do anything without them saying, yeah, that looks good, and that's something that we want the NCA to support. So we have all that there.
Great.
The MOU might be up there somewhere.
So a lot of good resources there for everybody to visit. Thank you so much for joining us, Suva. We really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us and then also introducing all of this information to our audience today. And with that, the opening remarks are now concluded. I'm going to hand over to Marco and Lee to introduce our featured speaker for the next hour.
Welcome, welcome. And it's really such an excellent pleasure that we're moving ahead with our featured speaker, Nick Arnett, CERT instructor, San Jose, Milpitas, California. And it's just such a pleasure to work with him. My name is Marco Johnson, and the moderator is Lee Falcon. And we'd like a few things to make sure that you have your Zoom for the speaker view and mute your microphones. And let's look together to work in the chat for the questions. And now about Nick, I'll tell you a little bit. There's some more information in the attendee hub, but Nick is a firefighter EMT with the U.S. Forest Service and Spring Valley Fire Department, a crisis responder, fire chaplain, former paramedic with experience in domestic and international emergency and disaster response and fire rescue, medical, communications, public information, and crisis intervention roles. Wow. He teaches crisis intervention, resilience, and community emergency preparedness. Is an author and has a book, Stress into Strength, Resilience Routines for Warriors, Wimps, and Everyone in Between. Will be released by HarperCollins Leadership in July 2021, and we'll learn more about that. I'm so excited, and we'll turn over to our featured speaker, Nick Arnett. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, my screen is doing funny things, but am I successfully sharing my screen?
Yes.
Good. Oh, now I can see it too. Okay, so there's the book. So yeah, that's coming out in July. I'll try not to do too much of a sales pitch. The sales pitch is really the information. And I've got a lot that I'm going to try to squeeze into the next hour. We'll see how well that works. And even though I'm going to be moving pretty fast, please don't hesitate to ask questions. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat. Sharing the wrong screen. Is that right?
Yeah, we need to share another screen.
Right now, we see you rather than the slide. Not that it's a problem seeing you.
Let me stop sharing and start sharing again. See what happens here. How about now?
Yes.
All right. You see the book?
Yes.
All right. So enough about the book. Although, you already heard a lot of this, so I will skip right by it. But I will mention I was up half the night because we had our first wildfires of the season last night up in Spring Valley, where I volunteer when I'm not getting paid to be a firefighter. So my publisher just made this available, and I'll put this slide up again at the end. You can get a free copy of the first chapter of the book by texting strength to that number. I actually just got this late last night. HarperCollins put this together. So I'll put that back up at the end if you're interested in that, but I don't want to make this too much of a sales pitch. But I will say that actually is my fourth book. There is on the left, the green book there, Resilience and Psychological First Aid for Community Responders, is a lot of what I'm going to talk about for the next hour, but in a lot more depth. And then resilience during the pandemic, I was able to write very quickly a year ago, using some of the material that I had gathered up for the big book that's coming out later this year. And then this last one, the red one, that is actually the most widely used pocket reference for stress management and crisis response, mostly for public safety and chaplains and clinicians and so forth. So it covers things that take a higher level of training than just psychological first aid. So if you remember from your CERT training, critical incident stress management, defusings and debriefings and so forth, it covers a lot of that along with psychological first aid. So the new book is very much my mission to change the way the world talks about stress, because somehow what happened in the last 50 years or so, actually more than that, about 70 years. So in the 1950s, researchers identified stress hormones and so forth and said, oh, stress can be bad for you. Well, somehow that turned into stress is bad for you, which is wrong. And when we teach people that stress is bad for them, we make it bad for them. So there are lots of charts like this, but those are really only a half truth. But let me back up and define stress first, because one of the problems is we don't even have really good definitions of stress. And I like to use this really simple one. Stress is when your heart beats faster. So one of the things I want you to notice about those slides is those were not all things we would characterize as negative. Getting a promotion, winning the lottery, things like that, those provoke a stress response. In fact, we perform better at things like public speaking or responding to a disaster if our stress response is activated. You wouldn't want a firefighter to go into a burning building or a forest that's on fire without an elevated stress response. We need that adrenaline going. Because that's what gives us not just energy, but also focus and concentration and the ability to respond more effectively to these three things: opportunities, challenges, and threats. So we tend to focus more, because of this negative association we have with the word stress, tend to focus more on the threats, but it really is also opportunities and challenges. But as I said, stress is really just half the story. And it has really struck me in the last week or two that we have this word stress that describes one part of our mind and body and how it responds, but science hasn't even really agreed on a word for what turns stress into strength, which is what I like to call renewal. And that's when your heart slows down. So the formula that the book is about, and what I want to talk about today, is that stress plus renewal is how we build strength. So when we get the right kinds and amounts of stress and the right kinds and amounts of renewal at the right intervals, at the right rhythm, that actually is the way that living things become stronger, more resilient, more flexible as well. So renewal, this thing that science doesn't really categorize, comes from courageous, compassionate, committed connections. So I'm going to talk about those in three dimensions, but let me use my favorite metaphor here, which is weightlifting. Weightlifting is stressful, and it's how we make our muscles stronger. So if you were to go to a coach and say, how do I grow my muscles? How do I become stronger? First, you learn to do it safely, right? Just as all throughout your CERT training, you learn that your safety is number one. The very first priority is learn how to do it safely. And as you heard in the introduction here, you need to get a little outside your comfort zone. If you're not getting outside your comfort zone, you're really not going to get the benefit of the exercise. And you need to kind of pay attention to yourself. One of the things that really jumped out at me as I did the research for the book was the power of noticing. Whether it's yoga, which helps us notice what our body is doing, both consciously and subconsciously, or noticing our own reactions to things, noticing what's going on. in the world around us, which, big buzzword these days, mindfulness, noticing, paying attention, deciding where to put our attention makes a huge difference. And then each of us needs to find the right rhythm. Again, I said that it's the combination of the rhythm of the right amount of stress and renewal that makes us stronger. That can be different for everybody. You got to get enough rest and nutrition, right? That's the renewal side that goes with the exercise. And you have to remember why you're doing it. So I'm going to talk about the spiritual side of all of this. And when I say spiritual, what I'm talking about is values, meaning, and purpose, and so forth. So religion can be a source of that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. It's why we do what we do, other than just, to make money and survive and become powerful and that sort of thing. And here's a huge one, which I'll come back to repeatedly. When you don't stick to it, just start over. Suva talked about, not going to the gym and all of a sudden a whole bunch of time has gone by, and it can be difficult to just start over. And I'll talk about why that is and how to avoid that trap. So none of this was to say that stress can't hurt you. It absolutely can. It's just we need to get rid of that idea of toxic stress and understand when stress does harm. Going back to weightlifting, if you try to lift too much weight, if you walk into the gym and try and lift 500 pounds, unless you're Olympic weightlifters, you're going to hurt yourself, right? If you stay at the gym all day long just lifting weights and you don't get that rest and nutrition, that's going to hurt you too. That'll just wear you down. If you don't get that, sufficient rest and protein and so forth, then your body won't have what it needs to turn the stress of lifting weights, which actually, by the way, injures your muscles, right? When you lift weights, if you get out of your comfort zone, it causes these little micro tears that are injuries to your muscle. But when you get your protein and you get your rest and so forth, that's what actually triggers the growth of the muscle. And then this last thing is what we would call codependence, right? Which is when you're out there so busy lifting everybody else's weights, you're not helping them because they're not doing their own weightlifting, and you're now doing too much, and that's going to wear you down. It is important to remember, though, that chronic stress, so there's extreme stress and chronic stress. Those are the two ways that stress can hurt you. And chronic stress is cumulative. It's cumulative not so much because of the stress itself, but because you're not getting the renewal. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about it in 3 dimensions: physical, social, and spiritual. So starting with physical, you've probably heard of the physical stress reaction. We talk about this all the time: fight or flight. So there's our little kitten who is ready to either do battle or run away. The renewal reaction is to rest and digest. And that phrase, rest and digest, was actually coined more than 100 years ago by the same scientist who came up with the idea of fight or flight, but we don't hear nearly as much about rest and digest. In the social dimension, the stress reaction is to become more defensive or to distance ourselves from other people, to isolate and that sort of thing. The renewal reaction is called tend and befriend. And that was only recently, only in the last 20 years or so, scientifically observed, primarily in women, although it's absolutely present in men as well. And it's associated with the hormone oxytocin, which has been called a stress hormone, but in many ways it is much more a renewal hormone. For example, it actually repairs damage to heart muscle that's done by adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones. And then spiritual, as I talked about, that's about priorities and purpose. And the stress reaction is to become more selfish and survivalist. And by the way, all of these stress reactions serve really good purposes. There are times when it's absolutely right to be more selfish and survivalist. It's appropriate to look after yourself and your family when things are turning south. You can get carried away with it, of course, hoarding too much toilet paper, and this is somebody's gigantic stock of disaster food and so forth. So you can get carried away in all of these, but they all serve really good, legitimate purposes. And then the spiritual renewal reaction is to stop, to pause and plan and think about your priorities and your purpose and why you're doing what you're doing, and what are your values and so forth. So again, strength and resilience come from rhythms of stress and renewal. Physical stress and renewal, like weightlifting or developing muscle memory, like we do in some of the CERT training about things like cribbing. You have to practice it with your muscles. That gives us strength for doing, owning, and using things. The social stress and renewal is what gives us mental and emotional strength for thinking and feeling. And then the spiritual stress and renewal gives us that stronger sense of perspective, priorities, and purpose. And it has really struck me, especially through the pandemic, that a lot of people seem to have lost their perspective. That is part of the stress response, or the lack of renewal, the lack of stopping and taking some time out to really reconsider and get that big picture back. So, one more time, strength and resilience come from balanced rhythms of stress and renewal. So I'm going to dive into each of those a little bit more. So again, physical stress and renewal gives us strength for doing and owning and using things as well. Social stress plus renewal gives us that mental and emotional strength for thinking and feeling. And spiritual stress and renewal gives us that stronger sense of perspective, priorities, and purpose. So here's the thing. To build up your resilience, to become more flexible and stronger, you kind of need to be an animal trainer, because the part of our brain that we're talking about is not logical. It's not rational. It's what I like to call the stress autopilot, or sometimes it's called the monkey mind. So you actually have to be a bit of an animal trainer of yourself. Your stress autopilot learns to become more flexible from experiences. Even though I write books, I know that you're not going to become more resilient or stronger from reading a book any more than you could become, your muscles would grow from reading a book about weightlifting. You actually need the experiences. And those experiences are safety, companionship, and predictability. And those come from those renewal responses that I talked about: resting and digesting, tending and befriending, pausing and planning. However, where we get stuck. If you meet somebody who is highly resilient, you're going to find they have a lot of motivation and they have a lot of self-discipline. But those are the results of practicing these resilience routines, these rhythms of stress and renewal, rather than the way you get there. So now that probably sounds like a catch-22. How do I practice these routines if I don't have motivation and self-discipline? Very simple. Start small and start over. Give yourself unlimited permission to start over. Unlimited permission to start over. Don't should on yourself. So what I mean by that is, if you're doing what Suvai talked about, and I've had a really hard time maintaining my level of normal level of exercise. I was doing 14-hour days plus travel time, doing vaccinations for 2 months, no time to get proper exercise. But what happens is, if we go through something like that, or for whatever reason, and everybody misses a day or two or more, sometimes a week or a month or a year, when we should on ourselves, though, and say, oh, I should be exercising, what we do is activate feelings of guilt and shame, and those actually get in the way of self-discipline and motivation. Guilt and shame are really powerful ways to erase your motivation, your self-discipline, and so forth. So the answer to that is also positive reframing. So instead of shoulding on yourself, so this is some pandemic stuff, right? We were told we shouldn't touch our face. Well, that's a negative way of looking at it. Positive reframing is, by not touching my face, I'm reducing the chance that I'll get infected. Or we're supposed to shelter in place. So instead of I should say stay home, the positive reframing is staying home helps keep our family healthy. And here's the big one. Instead of I've had a stressful day, think I need more renewal. I need to rest and digest. I need to tend and befriend. I need to pause and plan, because those are the things that will take that stressful day and transform it into strength. So going into each one a little bit more. Fight or flight stress plus rest and digest renewal gives us that strength for doing, owning, and using things. So the physical stressors are things like illness or injury, being too hot, too cold, tired, dehydrated, hungry, bankrupt, homeless, not having those muscle memory skills, and so forth. Those are all physically stressful. To activate physical stress and renewal, we need exercise. We need to practice things to build up the muscle memory. And it's also about things like managing possessions. Having too few possessions, not having a roof over your head, that's high stress. We see that with people who are affected by disasters. Having too many possessions can be pretty stressful as well. I think that's why Marie Kondo's been really successful with her show, which I've never seen, but Tidying Up, I guess, is the name of it. And the idea there that getting an optimal amount of possessions is ideal. fits right in with everything we know about stress and renewal. Good diet, getting enough rest and sleep is absolutely vital. And connecting with nature, we're seeing more and more research that shows that spending even a little bit of time each week in nature makes a big difference. And there's various theories for why that might be. And then there are these body movement things that are really an amazing shortcut. And we'll try to introduce a lot of words you might not have heard of, but this is a great one, interoception. I mentioned the power of noticing. So interoception is this conscious and subconscious awareness of what your body is doing. And so things like progressive muscle relaxation, which you can easily find online, or yoga, or if you don't like the Eastern religious associations of the word yoga, just call it body movement relaxation. It's still the same thing, really effective. Pilates, very similar, Tai Chi, martial arts. All of these things are really shortcuts to activating renewal, partly because they build interoception. And I'll talk a little bit more later about really how that works. Controlled breathing is another amazing shortcut for you and as a tool to help other people, like lower that stress level in the midst of a disaster and so forth. And in a 1 hour session here, there isn't time to actually go through this, but you can look up belly breathing and 4-7-8 breathing, or box breathing, which SWAT teams and SEALs and so forth use. And then there's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. I won't go through it in detail, but it's funny, the place I find myself using this more than anywhere else is I work the medical team at our San Francisco 49er games. I live near the stadium, and part of the medical team there. And for some reason, we get a lot of people having anxiety attacks at football games. I don't know if it's because the team is winning or losing or what, crowds. But this is a really simple way. I invite people to just go through this with me. And I actually also use this a bit with people who are very anxious about getting vaccinated. I'm standing there with a needle in which I'm going to stab into their arm, and I'll tell them, hey, it is reasonable to feel some fear about this, because look at what I'm about to do to you. And then if they really needed it, sort of take them through the grounding exercise to help them calm down. And butterfly hug tapping, again, in the time frame we have, we can't really practice this. Really, really simple and effective way for you to use yourself or teach to other people, and works especially well with children as well. And it taps into, to make a pun, the fact that alternately stimulating the two sides of our brain has this kind of amazing power to help disconnect the emotions from the memory of a stressful event. So there are a few things like that that I don't have time to go into, but the books do more. I mentioned diet. Every day, more research studies come out about how our gut is really our second brain. There's a bunch of nerve cells down there. I will talk a little later about the vagus nerve, which is the biggest nerve in your body, and it connects your gut to your brain. And so it turns out the health of our gut makes a huge difference in our mental and physical health, and just more and more evidence of that coming out all the time. So here's an example where stress is a good thing. So whole grains and unprocessed foods are harder for your gut to digest, and that's good for you, right? Even though it's harder. So let me explain why. If you eat highly processed foods or carbohydrates like sugars, soft drinks, which are, I have completely cut those out quite a while ago, because one can of a soft drink is like having 25 sugar packets. When you eat those, if the foods are highly processed, you get a lot more of the calories because your gut doesn't have to break down those whole grains and so forth. And your gut biome, all the bugs, the bacteria and fungus and so forth, that a couple thousand at least different species that live in our gut, their food is the stuff you're not digesting. So the whole grains work really well because you don't get as many calories and there's food for your gut biome. We really don't know exactly what a healthy gut biome looks like because there's so many different organisms involved in it. We know there's a few that really make a big difference, and slowly but surely, science is figuring out what a really healthy assortment is. But we know it is healthy to have a really broad assortment of them. Sleep is incredibly important. At the end of each of these sections, I'm going to recommend one book, and the book I will recommend in a moment is on sleep. the rapid eye movement sleep, the deep sleep is really, really important, especially if you've been through something that's high stress or traumatic. So especially after you've responded to a disaster, or you've been through, any high stress event in your life, whether it's yours or something, secondary trauma is very real. If you've witnessed it, been through it, you really need that deep sleep. So avoid substances that disrupt it. And that would be, the big one is alcohol. So we used to say moderate your alcohol intake after a high stress experience. Now we really say that just for a few days, avoid it completely. And then some of the old sleep aids and things, newer sleep medications tend not to interfere with it, but talk to your doctor. Make sure if you do need something to get to sleep, that it's not something that'll disrupt your rapid eye movement sleep. Turns out that research suggests that short naps are fine. Here's a funny thing though, you got to nap regularly to get the benefit of it. And so you either nap or you don't. The occasional naps don't do you much good. And what naps do for you is reduce daytime sleepiness, but they don't replace sleep, because nothing, I will repeat, nothing replaces lost sleep. The book I'm about to recommend, I thought after reading it, if everybody in the country would just read this book, a lot of our problems would go away, because there's a whole lot of things related to not getting enough sleep. And by the way, there are actually very, very few people who can get by on 4 or 5 hours of sleep per night. A lot of people who think they're doing just fine on that small amount of sleep really are not doing so well, and very likely setting themselves up for Alzheimer's. There is a very strong connection between not getting sufficient sleep and the onset of Alzheimer's dementia and so forth. So avoid stimulants close to bedtime. You really need a dark room. If you've got to work at night, you really want to completely darken your room to go to sleep. Probably most people have heard about the fact that the blue light from phones and tablets and computers stops your body from producing melatonin, which you need to feel sleepy. So color warming software will help avoid that. Whenever everybody I work with in public safety laughs at this stick to a regular sleep schedule, we can't, I was woken up at 3 o'clock this morning to go out to some fires. Yeah, regular sleep schedule, well, I wish. And then routines will help you get sleep as well. So another way to help get sleep is to do those breathing exercises I talked about before, or progressive muscle relaxation. It's easier to stay asleep if the room you're in is cool, and make your bedroom a haven for sleeping. No TV, no phone calls, don't do business in your bedroom. And here's one, very often after going through something high stress, we end up feeling tired and wired. If you've responded to any disasters, you know what I'm talking about. You're driving home and you're struggling to stay asleep at the wheel, yet when you get into bed, you're wide awake, even though you're exhausted. Well, the reason you were sleepy driving your car is you were seeing this familiar, repetitive scenery. Well, it turns out one of our psychologists figured out that watching a comedy that you've seen, especially that you've seen multiple times before, sort of reproduces that familiar sequence of images, and that'll help you fall asleep. And I can tell you, it works. And don't put pressure on yourself to fall asleep. Rather than going to bed and pressuring to fall asleep, just say, okay, I'm going to get in bed, I'm going to rest. And I've discovered that really helps me as well. And if you're concerned about your sleep, keep a diary, talk to your doctor. This is nothing to mess around with. Here's the book that I really recommend, Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep. There's been tremendous progress made in understanding sleep just because of computers and sensors and things. We can analyze sleep much more just in the last 10 years than we ever could before. And Matthew Walker's put together an excellent book about all the things we've learned. So the next category is mental and emotional resilience. That comes from this combination of defender distance stress with tend and befriend renewal. And this is about regulating our emotions and thinking more clearly and building those social bonds and so forth. So the social stressors are things like isolation and loneliness, or feeling abandoned, feeling unwanted or unappreciated, feeling criticized, embarrassment. I talked earlier about guilt and shame being these really powerful ways that interfere with our ability to have motivation and self-discipline and so forth. But we need some of that. So this I think often sounds odd, but if you've read any of Brene Brown's books, and that's a hint about the book I'm going to recommend at the end of this section, Brene Brown talks about vulnerability. That's a lot, and she researches guilt and shame. And her books really paint a wonderful picture of why it's important for us to actually go to the gym, essentially, for social stress by learning to be vulnerable with people. But that's got to be with people who are safe. And I'm going to talk a bit more about what it means to be safe. But fundamentally, we all just need people that we can be real with. What that means is letting trusted friends see the real you, but don't rush into that. That's like rushing into it is like going to the gym and lifting 500 pounds. If you trust people who don't deserve your trust and they betray that trust, that's a really, really tough thing to get through. So take it slow, just get out of your comfort zone a little bit. Don't give people a whole lot of trust until you really know you can trust them, but do get out of your comfort zone a little bit. And think of it, as I said a moment ago, as going to the gym for your mental health. So the way we activate that social renewal, the tending and befriending, that's through communicating well, cooperating, even competition, when it's friendly competition and so forth, and teamwork. Those do that. So look for friends, coaches, mentors, and so forth who will accompany you without judging or trying to fix you. There's a wonderful video that I use when I teach, no time to show it today, called "It's Not About the Nail." So make a note of that. I probably should have put it on a slide somewhere. It's not about the nail. It's on YouTube. It's hilarious, but it makes a great point about not fixing things. And then avoid isolation. No, it's me too, which I will talk about a little more, is one of the most powerful ways of activating that tend and befriend. That the monkey mind, the stress autopilot, really doesn't like to think that it's alone. So if it's an honest me too, don't pretend you have a me too about something you really don't. Like, if you meet a Vietnam War vet and you weren't in Vietnam, you don't say me too, right? But empathy doesn't require understanding. You certainly can acknowledge that I can't possibly understand what it was like to go to Vietnam, but it must have been tough. So social connections include people like friends, family, mentors, coaches, and teams. But it also includes animals. The most amazing thing I've ever gotten paid to do was with CAL FIRE, our state fire agency, had me see the dog in the green vest there in the upper left is from Hope Animal Assisted Crisis Response. And I would actually escort the dog and the handler around to visit firefighters and the community during some of our gigantic wildfires that we had a few years ago. So the picture on the upper right is part of the CAL FIRE Employee Support Services team and a couple of the emotional support dogs we had in fire camp in Santa Rosa during our North Bay fires a few years ago. Hope Animal Assisted Crisis Response, the dog with the green vest, they and Canine First Responders, which is in Connecticut, and maybe one or two others, really have this very, very high level of training and screening for dogs. We're comfortable taking them out into the community. Some of the others will bring into fire camp and have them visit there and so forth. And then there's horses. So we have a horse. That's not actually our horse, but horses and dogs are incredibly sensitive to our emotions, although they have somewhat different responses. A supportive dog, when the dog senses that you're upset, will come to you and sort of read your emotions and respond in a supportive way. And then, if nothing else, simply acknowledge what you're feeling. Horses are prey animals, where dogs are predators. The dogs have the eyes facing forward, horses, the eyes face outward, because they are prey animals, and their stress response is to run away. So horses are used in coaching people. One of the fascinating ways is the horse will sense if you are calm and centered and will not come to you until you figure out how to become calm and centered. So it helps you calm down. And then the one in the lower right is, that's Sunny, our sun conure. She flew into our backyard a few years ago. We tried to find her owner. Couldn't find him, which surprised me because they're kind of expensive birds. And I would say that she belongs to us now, but it's, in her mind, it's pretty much the other way around. We're her staff. Now, I don't think parrots can read emotions the way that dogs and horses can, but caring for anything creates resilience. So whether it's caring for your garden, caring for people, or caring for a parrot, that helps us become more resilient. And there's good, solid psychological evidence that shows us that caring creates resilience. And to me, when that clicked, I also realized why people want to take their emotional support peacocks on airplanes and things like that, because caring for that animal actually makes the person more resilient. Now, I don't think that's a justification for taking your emotional support peacock on an airplane, but it helped me understand why. So here's the recommended book, Brene Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. I actually would recommend all of her books, but that's the great one to start with if you haven't read her stuff. And by the way, Matthew Walker, who wrote the other book, and Brene Brown have lots of videos on YouTube and so forth. If you're not a book reader, there's lots of other ways to get their stuff. Brene Brown sort of came to national attention through her TED Talk. So that's out there too. So third category, spiritual resilience. So that was selfish and survivalist stress plus pause and plan renewal. And that gives us greater strength for perspective, priorities, and purpose. So the spiritual stressors are when life seems meaningless, when we don't feel like we have clear goals and purpose. We don't have a clear why. And then betraying either having our values betrayed or even betraying our own values, because this is very much about values. And then the huge stressor, loss of control, feeling helpless. When I've done over 1,000 critical incident stress debriefings over the last 17 years or so. And pretty much if it truly was a traumatic incident, when we get to that question, what was the hardest part of this incident? It's always about the feeling helpless, feeling out of control. That's the big stressor. And by definition, disasters include that, because we wouldn't call it a disaster if we could control it with the resources we have, right? So that uncontrollability, that unpredictability, those are gigantic stressors. So spiritual resilience is about getting your perspective back after a high stress event, having a set of values that you embrace and live out, knowing why you do what you do. I think people get involved in CERT for all sorts of different reasons, but as the why of really helping others in a time of need sinks in, even if people come in for more selfish reasons or whatever, that grows that spiritual resilience. And there's more and more attention being paid to the having a sense of wonder and awe. My personal strongest experience of that really surprised me was a few years ago. I went up to Oregon to see the total eclipse of the sun. And when the sun was in totality, I just was emotionally overwhelmed, and it caught me completely off guard. And driving home, I was talking to the friend I went with, and realized it's because of the scale of that thing. It's the sun and the moon and and the planets, and this is literally an astronomical event, which we don't get to see very often. I mean, it's always there, but we don't get to see very often. And that sense of wonder and awe, I think, helps us keep that bigger perspective, because when stress hits, when disaster hits or whatever, we get that tunnel vision, we get the narrow perspective, and things that give us that sense of wonder and awe help us get that bigger picture back. So more generally, contemplative practices help us get back into the present, get back our normal sense of time and perspective, because stress alters our sense of time. Things either seem to go by really fast or really slowly. We get tunnel vision. And we want to get into the present, because the monkey mind, the stress autopilot, really is never in the present. It's either generating anxiety from things that happened in the past or worry about things that might happen in the future. But again, as with everything else, there's good reasons for it to do that. It's trying to get us to learn from these stressful things that happened in the past by replaying those things and getting the logical part of our brain to think, well, how would I handle that differently the next time? And in doing that, it's really rehearsing in case that happens again. So one of the things that annoys people after a high stress event is that it tends to replay itself. So, you go through this disaster and you keep seeing the images and it keeps going through your head. And it's like, well, that's really annoying. Can't change the past. Well, that's not what it's about. It's your brain trying to change the future in case something like that happens again. And I find it calming and relaxing to remind myself that, hey, that is my brain earning its paycheck. It is trying to get me to learn. So contemplative practices include things like meditation, prayer, if you're so inclined. The whole mindfulness thing is all about this, but anything that really helps you unplug and get your perspective back, like going on some sort of retreat or keeping a journal and so forth, where you can sort of step back and get that big picture back. So here's the book that I recommend for this section. although it crosses into some of the others as well. All of these things cross over quite a bit. These three, physical, social, spiritual boundaries are not hard and fast boundaries. They all interconnect quite a bit. But Fred Luskin, Forgive for Good, really, really wonderful stuff. I learned about this book on a retreat for first responders who've really hit the end of their rope. People come into this, we call it a retreat because if we called it inpatient psychotherapy, nobody would come to it. But that's what it is. But it's for people who are really suffering from post-traumatic stress. And it really helped me recognize that the role of forgiveness, and if you notice the heading up at the top, holding a grudge is hazardous to your health. Absolutely true, and is a big part of getting unstuck from really traumatic things. So I love to use the story of two wolves every time I teach. Some of you may have heard it, and here's how it goes. An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he says to the boy. It's a terrible fight, and it's between two wolves. One is bad. He's anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. And then he goes on to say the other wolf is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. And the same fight is going on inside of you and inside of every other person too. So the grandson thinks about this for a minute and asks his grandfather, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. So the reason I use that story all the time, there's several reasons, but one, it absolutely corresponds to the way we are wired. If you've ever taken a physiology course, you may have learned about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the bad wolf, the bad and good are in quotes because we need the sympathetic nervous system. That's our stress response. Again, it makes us perform better when we face opportunities, challenges, or threats. So that's fight or flight, defend or distance, and selfish and survivalist. And then the good wolf, those things are all things that activate our parasympathetic nervous system. I mentioned the vagus nerve, the biggest nerve in your body that connects your gut to your brain. That's the center of this parasympathetic nervous system. And it is rest and digest, tend and befriend, pause and plan. And we really do need to feed it. The big mistake we make, and you can buy lots and lots of books about stress reduction, which I think is just nonsense. You don't want chronic stress and you don't want extreme stress, but that's not what stress reduction implies. Stress reduction goes back to that crazy idea that stress is always bad for you. But it doesn't work also because you can't starve the bad wolf. You don't have to feed your bad wolf because bad wolves take whatever they want. Your sympathetic nervous system is going to do its thing. You can't. Just running away from the source of the stress, you're still in fight or flight. You're still in defend or distance. So you really, and this all speaks to what psychologists call our negative bias. We tend to have a much stronger reaction to negative information. I think that's why we have all these research studies about the negative effects of stress and very few that really even categorize renewal. But we need to feed her. We have to be very intentional about activating renewal and feeding the good wolf. So a couple things about leadership that I always like to include. A lot of you, if you come to this conference, I'm going to assume you're probably a CERT leader of some sort. The best thing you can do as a leader is share with others that you have been through a tough time and here's what worked for you. But you don't want to talk about what you went through, right? You don't want to, if you're still struggling with that bad thing you went through and you haven't resolved it, you don't work it out as a leader, by sharing it with the people around you. So, for example, I went through a really, really bad thing at a fire back in 1982. And I worked through it through a combination of journaling and actually doing some, what's called EMDR, which is one of these alternate brain side things with a clinician, writing some letters to firefighters who were involved in it. And it took a lot of work, but I can now talk about that incident without feeling like I'm back there and as if it's happening all over again. So again, remember I said me too is really powerful. So remember that when you're a leader as well. And really everybody in CERT is a leader at one time or another. So where do you work through the struggles? That's in conversations with your trusted friends or therapists or whatever, not when you're doing professional or, in the case of CERT, volunteer duties. So let me look at how much time we have here. I'm going to zip right through a few things. I'm going to give you a really high level look at psychological first aid, and I'm going to recommend, well, I'm going to recommend a book I wrote and a couple of online courses that are great. So psychological first aid's been around for decades, but it's very confusing when you study the research that's been done because there are lots of different protocols. But in the last few years, we have really zeroed in on a couple of protocols that we use as part of critical incident stress management for individuals. We use them all the time for families and so forth. So psychological first aid fits into the critical incident stress management continuum of care. People tend to associate CISM, critical incident stress management, with debriefings. That's just one little part of it, as you can see. So it's what we're doing right now, pre-incident planning and preparation. It is individual support, it's supporting groups and teams, it's doing referrals, which we all need to know how to do, and when to do referrals. It does include the defusings and debriefings, although those take more training than psychological first aid. It includes spiritual support, so when I put on my chaplain hat, specialized family support, and then of course, clinicians, and as I mentioned, the retreat, inpatient on-site care. So psychological first aid just fits right in here. We use it for individual support, we use it for group support, and if you're doing psychological first aid, you need to know when and how to do referrals. The goals, I'm going to say PFA, so I don't have to say psychological first aid over and over. The goals of PFA are to restore a sense of safety. So that's speaking right to that monkey mind, the stress autopilot, which is, gets frantic when we're under stress. Want to help bring it back to a sense of safety. So remember I said out of control, feeling helpless, those are the big stressors. So we want to get people from feeling out of control to a sense of in control. And one of the things that means is turning as much control as you can over to the people that you're helping. So invite, never tell people what to do unless it's an immediate safety risk. So you're going to assist people with their current needs. There's actually no point in doing anything psychological with people who need to eat, need to sleep, need food, and so forth. If you've ever had a psychology class and learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, medical care, those things all come ahead of the psychological stuff. And then remember I said that isolation is a big stressor, so we want to get people out of isolation into community. And I will say again, need to know how and when to make referrals. So there's informal referrals, get them plugged into their own social support network, or formal referrals to a professional. And then occasionally, if someone's life is at risk, call in 911. So the components of psychological safety are stabilization, like let's get that stress response. We want to feed a good wolf, get that stress response down. You need to gather information so that you know what what people's needs are, then prioritize. Very often when people are very, very stressed, it's tough to prioritize. A disaster creates so many priorities that just helping them to sift through those and figuring out what their priorities need to be makes a big difference. And then give them that practical assistance as you're able to. Connect them with other sources of support. CERT is just one part of all the different organizations and agencies and so forth that respond to disasters. Handouts are helpful. Just don't ever start with handouts, and support and refer. And of course, again, take care of yourself. Hopefully you heard that all through your initial CERT training that taking care of yourself and staying safe is important. So I get this question sometimes because I do a lot of this stuff. How do I get rid of bad feelings? There's only one way, have them. It's sort of like what Shrek says about farting, better out than in. And the reason I mention this is to pound home the point that when you're doing psychological first aid, you're creating an environment for people to have the bad feelings, where it's safe to have the bad feelings, to express their anger, their frustration, and so forth, because as those come out and people aren't holding them in, that's helpful. Now, the one thing you don't do is try to provoke those feelings, right? You're just creating a safe place. Even though clinicians provoke those feelings, for you to do that, that would be like an EMT doing surgery in the field, likely to kill the patient. So we don't do that. There are some sneaky stressors to watch out for, particularly when you respond to a disaster. You're going to see a lot of things. You're going to see people who are going through a lot of stress, and secondary trauma, sort of empathetically picking up stress from other people, is very, very real. I can tell you, absolutely happens. And so you're going to pick some of that up. Another one that can be very sneaky is identification. And simple way to explain that is, if a firefighter as a 10-year-old child at home responds to a call in which they have to do CPR on a 10-year-old child, is really going to feel a lot of stress from that, because they're going to identify with the parents of that child. And this can be hard to realize is happening, but just sort of put that in your mind to see, did I see something that I can identify with? And then trigger patterns, where this can be later on, seeing familiar or sights, smells, and sounds, and even calendar dates can bring up those feelings again. I worked with a police officer who had served in Iraq, who told me that every time he drove past the asphalt plant, he felt like he was back in Iraq, because the smell of the asphalt smelled like the burning oil wells. And part of the reason I'm telling you all this is also so that you can normalize it, realize that it's just normal for these things to happen to you, and to let people, if people are experiencing them, let them know, hey, you're having it's kind of a cliche in the crisis intervention business, but you're having a normal reaction to a very abnormal event. So here are the steps in PFA. First, establish safety. As we've said many times, you're going to make contact, do some stabilization, identify needs and priorities, and then acknowledge and normalize, which is a little bit of what I was just talking about. I'll talk about it a little more. Help people get out of isolation into community. Encourage them by providing information, including things that will help them realize that they are having those normal reactions to an abnormal event, and then help them with recovery and referrals. So diving into each of those, establishing safety. So first, hopefully this is second nature to you through your CERT training. Get away from the incident. That's to make them physically safe, and you don't want them to have to look at it if they don't have to. But again, if they are physically safe, you don't want to resist the temptation to take too much control away, because remember, you're trying to get them from out of control to in control. So whenever possible, you're going to invite them. Hey, would you like to go over here where we don't have to look at all that, right? Give them that practical assistance. That could be like shelter, food, healthcare, and so forth. And if they need, if they haven't slept in a couple of days, don't be trying to do psychological intervention stuff until they've had some sleep. It's not going to be helpful. So here's emotional safety. Confidentiality is utterly, utterly essential. You've got to keep anything people share with you confidential. And then going the other way, disasters, there's always a lot of rumors flying around and bad information and so forth. And so only share with people information you are utterly certain is accurate, because if you pass on something that turns out not to be true, you're going to break trust. And once you've broken trust, it's very, very hard to be supportive of people. So talking helps. Remember, I said you don't want to provoke a reaction. That's actually that next bullet point. Don't push, prod, or pressure. Just create the safe place for people to talk. So I usually tell people, if I'm with a group of people, I'll invite them to talk, but I'll make it perfectly clear it is fine if this is not the right time and place for them to talk about it. And I think that actually helps people feel safer. And I think they actually talk more when I bend over backwards to say, hey, it's okay if you don't want to talk right now. And I always say, I'm not here to fix this or make it better. That's as much a reminder to me as information for the people I'm talking to, because that's really not what we're there for. You can't fix someone else's emotions. What you can do is create the safe place for them to have them. And then spiritual safety. Remember, this was about mission and sense of purpose and priorities. So you got to respect other people's priorities, their mission, their purpose. No shoulds. Reflect, don't give advice, accept their beliefs, and be kind rather than nice. And that's what that's a way to define compassion. What I mean by that is, when we're nice to people, it's usually we're doing something so they'll like us. When we're kind to people, we're giving them gifts they really can't ever repay. So making contact, don't walk up to people and say, how are you doing? So you don't want to ask any kind of yes or no questions, right? If you say, how you doing? They're going to say, I'm fine, right? Instead, you want to ask these more open-ended questions. Is it okay if we talk for a few minutes, get their name, try to use their name, assure them that you're going to keep things confidential? We use a lot of jargon around disasters, ICS and IC and, all that stuff. Try to take that completely out of your vocabulary and avoid all the cliches. Cliches usually are about trying to make people feel better. Your job in psychological first aid is not to make people feel better. Your job is to create the safe place for them to have the bad feelings. So it's almost the opposite. So some ways to invite conversation. What's most important to you right now? If it sounds like something where there's more to it, you can say, can you tell me more about that? What's the hardest thing for you right now? What do you need the most right now? And if you only remember two things out of this whole talk I'm giving, those last two questions, what are you finding most difficult right now? And what do you need the most right now, are really, really powerful. You can even ask yourself those questions because, again, disasters are overwhelming. They're huge and they impact every part of people's lives. And so people are bouncing all over the place. Invite them to pick that one thing that's hardest right now and just deal with that. And that's why you ask them in that order. Because if you just say, what do you need the most right now? They're going to be all over the place. But if they pick that one thing that's the hardest, then they can usually answer that second question, what do you need the most right now? Stabilization. So when you see people in acute distress, all of these kinds of behaviors, you don't have to call 911, but these are the people who should get your attention first, right? Because these are the people who are really having a tough reaction to the disaster. So reassure them that these are normal and natural reactions. Kind of like I said I did with people, when I'm about to stick a needle in their arm, they say, well, I'm scared of shots. Well, of course, I'm going to stick a needle in your arm. It is perfectly reasonable to be scared of shots. And we're also injecting a substance into you that most of us don't have the PhD to understand. So it's just, it sounds backwards, but it is very reassuring to people to simply acknowledge, yeah, this is a tough thing. And even if you are saying nothing, to just be a calm and comforting presence and show with your actions that you care. We have tons of solid psychological research that shows us when people can see that someone cares, whether they do anything or not, it makes a big difference. And you can just invite them to take a walk with them. And again, no pressure. You can invite them to talk, but if they don't talk and you just walk with them, rest assured that you're doing some good. So the grounding exercises, the breathing, relaxation exercises that I talked about earlier, those can be great if people want to do them. If they're separated from their family and friends, getting them together with people that they trust is good. But don't tell people to calm down or relax. That's going to backfire, right? That's you trying to take control when what you want to do is give them control. And do make referrals when needed, and I'll talk about that some more.
Yeah,
So,
hey, Nick, this is really looking good. Let's check the clock and see how much you want to sum up or take anything.
Yeah, I will sum up. I'm gonna skip through some things real fast here, but I do want to speak to this one. Bring your curiosity, not for what happened, but for how did they experience it. And there's a great article from Dr. Judd Brewer. So the big thing is acknowledging and normalizing. So we acknowledge sort of all these physical signs of stress. We acknowledge the mental and emotional, social signs of stress, all of these things. Acknowledge and normalize the spiritual signs of stress. Just let people know they're having natural reactions to very abnormal events. And I will make this slide deck available, by the way, so you'll have that. So there's that statement. You're having a natural reaction to an abnormal event. Lots of people are feeling that way. Reflect their emotions back to them and so forth. Get them out of isolation into community, give them handouts, know when to refer. So I'll touch on this a little bit. Just want to make sure I go through this. If people are rapidly getting worse, refer. A lot of us are mandatory reporters if there's domestic, child, or elder abuse, if they need medication. By the way, if people are struggling in the first month, just understand that's normal. Don't worry about people's reactions for a month, unless it's some of those other things. And then with children, unless they have a significant developmental issue. And then if somebody wants a referral, definitely give them a referral. So look at that. I am wrapping up. So the book is there. It's on Amazon. It covers a lot more topics than here, and it covers all of these topics in more depth. And I said I would recommend some more in-depth training. So NCTSN there has a great online, these are both free, by the way, great online class. And then Dr. George Everly, who is one of my instructors, has a great, again, free class on Coursera. The NCTSN class has this wonderful field guide that you can download. Again, free. And practice gratitude and generosity. Get your brain out of that negative mode, build your optimism, positive thinking. So my little challenge for 30 days doesn't have to be in a row. Remember, start small, be willing to start over as many times as you need to. Write down 3 things you're grateful for, 3 things you're looking forward to. Do a little anonymous act of kindness. The only rule there is nobody else can know you did it, and they can be big things or little things. So remember, start small, start over, be gentle with yourself. Don't should on yourself. That's so important. I'll say it twice. That's from my mentor, Janet Childs, who started our Bay Area Critical Incident Stress Management team. And feed your good wolf. There's that slide again. And that's it. So I'm happy to, as we have time, to
We're just
take
about
questions.
done. Yeah, we're just about done now, and it's just awesomely excellent is what I'm seeing in the chat.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for saying so.
And
The command center fell silent. I guess that's good.
yeah, well, thank you so much. And we're getting ready now to take a break as we go on to our next session. Thank you so much, Nick. That was
You're
just
welcome.
awesomely excellent.
Oh, there was a question back there. How does it work when people are afraid of dogs and horses?
Yeah.
Well, no easy answer to that. But we give people control, and we're not going to push dogs and horses on people who are afraid of them. I actually was kind of afraid of horses, we just take it slow. It's that same thing. Start small, start over.